Roman soldier. Extensive ruins reveal that the thriving city of Verconia once spread across these fields.
In the province of Britannia, what we now call Britain, it was the fourth largest city. It would have been a big place. It would have had a population measured in thousands of people. It covered 80 or 90 acres. The whole city was absolutely crammed with buildings, shops, apartment blocks, the whole works.
By the 4th century, however, Roman rule was coming to an end. The legions were pulled back to the capital, abandoning cities all across the empire.
You began to see the population declining, and buildings on the margins are ruined and they're not reoccupied. It's like the kind of Rust Belt hitting the end of Roman Britain.
But even after the fall of Rome during the Dark Ages, this city, which became known as Wroxeter, mysteriously managed to prosper. And in the 5th century, it even underwent a massive reconstruction.
Somebody in a position of authority lays everything out in the old city centre new. The favourite idea amongst the historical or archaeological community at the moment is that the person in authority might just possibly have been a Christian bishop.
But some experts believe that a powerful warrior was responsible for this epic rebuilding, none other than King Arthur.
The word Arthur in Old British, Brythonic, the language that was spoken at the time, means the bear. Now there was a figure known as the Bear who ruled from a city called Wroxeter, or Verconia as the Romans called it, and during the time Arthur is thought to have lived, 500 AD, it was in fact the capital of Britain.
Best-selling author and historian Graham Phillips is convinced that this historical King Arthur was the keeper of the Holy Grail.
The last of the treasures from Rome, when Rome was sacked, were brought to Britain, and the place they were brought to, for a while anyway, was to Wroxeter, to its capital. And amongst that was the Chalice of Magdalene.
The Chalice of Magdalene is the cup mentioned in the Bible that was used by Mary Magdalene to anoint the body of Christ after the crucifixion.
The story goes that when she saw the risen Jesus outside the tomb, she used this small cup or chalice to collect a few drops of Jesus' blood. And then this became a very holy relic. It was believed to possess miraculous healing powers for anybody who drank from it.
Legend has it that this cup was found in Jerusalem by the mother of Rome's first Christian emperor, Constantine, and kept in what is today the Vatican. According to Phillips, the Chalice of Magdalene is the Holy Grail, and its significance is more than religious.
If you possess this cup, then in a sense you are the legitimate ruler. Arthur, it seems, was certainly in this country anyway, regarded as like the last emperor because the rest of the empire had collapsed. And having this cup was really his proof that he was the emperor.
And according to Phillips, after Arthur's time, there is no trace of the chalice for many hundreds of years, until it suddenly turns up in this medieval castle.
This is the home of Fulk Fitzwarine in around about 1200 AD. He was a direct descendant of King Arthur, and he was the one who openly boasted to having the Chalice of Magdalene, and he kept it here in a privately built chapel in the castle.
It was during this time that the tales of King Arthur and his quest first appeared in poems and stories.
It's called the White Castle, and the area is called Whittington, which is Old English for White Town. Whittington, White Town. In all the stories of King Arthur, the Grail Guardian, also known as the Fisher King, lived in a castle called the White Castle, in a place called the White Town. So here seems to have been where the entire Arthurian Grail romances began, with all the connections that were here. So this was the perfect place to start the search for the historical Chalice of Magdalene.
The chalice then disappears from all historical records for another 600 years.
The next time it is referenced historically was in the 1850s, where a direct descendant of Fulk Fitzwarine, in fact his last surviving descendant, a man called Thomas Wright, he refers to the fact that he himself still possesses the Chalice of Magdalene, and he lived nearby, about 20 miles from Whittington, near a place called Hawkstone Park, where we are now.
Strangely, this Thomas Wright was also the direct descendant of Thomas Wright, the landscape architect, who built the monuments at Shugborough.
And as he had no children to hand it on to, he decided that what he was going to do was to hide it and leave a almost Arthurian set of clues as a trail to lead to where it was.
To find the hidden chalice, Phillips searched for clues in the books that Wright had authored, including a history of Shropshire. In the back of that volume was a mysterious sequence of Roman numerals. He knew they somehow had to be the key to the location of the Grail.
Nobody knew what on earth they were, until in the end I realized that they tied up with the Psalms of the Old Testament. They were biblical references. The first Roman numeral might be 26, and the one underneath it might be, say, 5. It meant Psalm 26, verse 5. So I thought, could that possibly be what it was? And that's how I started.
Also in the back of the book was a drawing of Hawkstone Park. With that final clue, Phillips started off on the treasure hunt of a lifetime. He came to the park and read the first psalm verse to begin his search.
Lift up mine eyes unto the hills, lead me to the rock, and it referred to the house of the Lord. Well, it just so happened that at Hawkstone Park, in the middle of the estate, Thomas Wright, on the highest point of the estate, built this ruined chapel, this ruined arch. And it seemed to me that this has got to have been what the first of the references referred to. The second reference, the second psalm, said, lead me into the bowels of the earth. Well, it just so happens that right below this arch, there are a series of caves cutting through the hillside that have been there since Roman times, where they were used as copper mines. I had to have been onto something. It obviously meant that I had to next go into these caves below the arch. I came down here to the entrance to the cave, which is right below the arch, and, well, went in to see what I'd find. At the heart of this labyrinth of caves, there's this area that had been cut out at considerable expense by Thomas Wright. It's called the Grotto, and inside here he had 4 statues erected. 2 of them still survive. The lion here, the eagle there. The other 2 are recorded as being a bull and an angel. Why he had them put here at that point, I had no idea. So I continued on through the labyrinth of caves, going ever deeper into the heart of the mountain. The next psalm read, lead me through the darkness and towards the light. So I just continued through the caves, getting deeper and deeper, wondering if the light would ever come. But in the end, what I did was emerge at the other side of the hill. So I got out of the darkness and finally into the light. Coming out the caves, I found myself here in this valley. And it just so happened that the next psalm verse read, lead me down the valley to the house of God. Was there going to be a house of God, a church at the end of this valley? I'll have to find out. This has to have been what Thomas Wright wanted us to find. And when I realised that Hodnet, which is what this little village is called, this is where Thomas Wright himself lived, and this is the 1,000-year-old church that he attended, this has got to have been the place that the clues were alluding to. So let's go check it out.
Thomas Wright had given this magnificent stained glass window as a gift to the church, so Phillips knew it had to contain his next clue.
Here, Thomas Wright has represented 4 figures, and it says underneath their names the 4 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But when you look at one of them to the right, the one that's supposed to be St. John, you notice that it's quite clearly a female figure. Firstly, I mean, the figure hasn't got a beard. And secondly, if you look closely, you'll notice that she's even got breasts. I mean, this is clearly, why is it a female?
The Gospel of St. John alludes to the disciple whom Jesus loved most. This person rested his head on Jesus' bosom throughout the Last Supper.
The church traditionally never liked the idea that Jesus would have had a close female companion. So, because it was written about in John's Gospel, people often, the church traditionally taught that this disciple was St. John, whereas now a lot more people tend to think that that disciple was Jesus' only known female disciple, Mary Magdalene. And I think this is what Thomas Wright has done here. He has represented John as Mary Magdalene holding the chalice of Magdalene.
Above each of the 4 disciples is a mystical figure, an angel, a lion, a bull, and an eagle. The same 4 figures that had stood as statues in Thomas Wright's underground grotto.
The figure with the chalice, Mary Magdalene or John, directly above that figure is the eagle. So could it be that there was something in the eagle statue? That's what this whole set of clues seem to be leading to.
Phillips raced back to the grotto to examine the eagle statue.
You can still see it's an eagle. There's its breast, its feet are down here, but its head's gone, the base is gone, it's all broken up. And the records showed that in the 1920s, somebody was trying to move it, and it fell over and broke, and that's how it got into this condition. So it seemed that if anything was ever hidden in it, it was probably long since gone. As far as it seemed I was going to have absolutely no chance of ever discovering the chalice of Magdalene.
For those who love the English countryside, the gentle hills and picturesque towns of Shropshire have plenty to delight the eye. For intrepid Grail detective Graham Phillips, Shropshire is the bullseye. Graham followed a complex series of hidden clues that he believes reveal the location of the Holy Grail. The last of these clues led him back to this statue. Inside it, he expected to find the object of his quest. Unfortunately, he came up empty-handed.
Obviously, I was extremely disappointed to discover the statue was all broken up. But then there was a ray of hope.
His quest was far from over. While reviewing some historical records, Phillips stumbled across a tantalizing piece of information.
I found out that in the 1920s, when the statue was being moved and first broken, the man who was moving it recorded that when it was broken, there was a small hollow found in the base, and inside that there was a cup. And I thought, that's it, that's the cup I'm looking for, but it's been found in the 1920s. So I thought, well, that's it, it's gone forever.
Or was it? After extensive research, Phillips tracked down the man's great-granddaughter and asked about the cup that was found in the statue. Her answer exceeded his wildest hopes.
She said, yes, I think we've still got it somewhere. So I went up into the attic where she still had this cup, and it was all wrapped up in old newspapers from the 1940s, newspapers, so it'd been up there for ages and ages. And she opened it up, and there was this small green cup that looked for all the world like a tiny egg cup. This was it, this little cup that had been found in the eagle statue. Seemingly the one that had been put there by Thomas Wright, and perhaps the one that had a history going all the way back to, well, maybe even Mary Magdalene herself.
When Phillips had it analyzed by archaeologists at the British Museum, it seemed this simple stone cup, so unlike the ornamental portrayals of the Holy Grail through the centuries, could be the real thing after all.
The first thing that they said was that it was a scent jar, probably dating from the 1st century, a scent jar of Roman design. Well, that suddenly made sense, because according to the Bible, when Mary Magdalene went and collected drops of Jesus' blood at the Holy Sepulchre, she had taken along a jar containing scent to anoint the body, and it was that she'd kept the blood of Jesus in. And the interesting thing is that this cup is made from alabaster, and that is what the cup that belonged to Mary Magdalene is supposed to be.